And today's webinar will discuss the progress of ADB's Regional Cooperation Integration Index, Pacific Regional Cooperation and Integration Index, ARCII, and just some brief background before we start our session. There have been emerging demand for the need to measure the track and the progress, and where we can suggest as areas for further strengthening and improvement for regional cooperation and integration. There have been a number of regional cooperation and integration index indicators from various sources, but there have not been not enough and effective the composite indicator that we can use to capture a very comprehensive multiple sort of facets of regional cooperation integration. And in 2017, ADB introduced the first index called ARCII, which is now a part of our flagship report, Asia Economic Integration Report, every year, that has updated numbers to share some progress and in 6 different dimensions to indicate the progress of RCI. And this index actually has a very innovative feature. We include a majority of bilateral measures that are publicly available. We use the 26 indicators, and 24 out of 26 were based on the bilateral indicators, and it actually provides a much more granular the characteristics of multiple drivers of regional cooperation integration in 6 different dimensions to represent diverse sort of aspects of RCI, and that helps the indicators that allow comparison across different 6 dimensions, as well as this composite indicator also help us compare the progress of the RCI in different region and also in different even country. While we do not publish the indicator, that composite index for a country level, the website actually provides the index that are compiled for each country as well. Over right now it's about 10 years. And this it actually provides a very essential information about how the RCI as a sort of more composite the index that captures different aspects of RCI. And building on this arch, we have launched this project to strengthen the methodology and then also increase the coverage of index with the 3 different objectives. First, we want to really enhance the conceptual framework and strengthen the database and improve the methodology to ensure that the index remains at the forefront of RCI indicators. We also want to make sure that the index does respond to the demand for the ADB operations. There are increasing number of ADB operations on the RCI, and we want to make sure that this index better serving the ADB's RCI strategy and an operational plan. And also, we want to develop the research and the capacity building that up to date with this most front line of the econometrics that help us build this most comprehensive, effective composite index. And during our inception workshop in April, we have discussed many other developments on the ARCII methodologies and presented some proposal to enhance the ARCII conceptual framework. And based on that discussion, this webinar today will discuss some of these aspects. First, we want to discuss the latest estimates of the baseline ARCII, which is an update of the ARCII based on the ongoing methodology and then the database that comprises 6 different dimensions on the ARCII. And we want to present new indicators that will become a part of the ARCII framework, including the digital connectivity and then environmental sustainability. And finally, we want to also introduce some preliminary work on spatial analysis for the determinants of our ARCII, which will give some hints and also promote the efforts to use this ARCII in various research projects. So we have excellent panelists with a strong background in the regional integration today. And they are going to share their insights and suggestions on the ongoing work, and as well as providing some feedback on our efforts to improve ARCII. And we look forward to working continuously with our ADB colleagues and various external partners on this ARCII project to make this index much more relevant and then useful. I do hope that we have very active participation today, and we benefit from your comments and inputs for further development. So let me stop here. I'm going to introduce our panelists today. First, well, we will have the presentation by Rolando, the economist in our team, who's leading this improvement of the methodology and database for ARCII. And he's also a main contributor of ARCII-related work to our flagship publication, Asia Economic Integration Report. Followed by the presentation, we will have a panel discussion. We have a distinguished panelist today. We have Mr. Hans Holzacker, who's the chief economist from CRII Institute. We also have Alfredo Perdigero, who's the director of a Southeast Asia department of ADB. And we also have our old friend and colleague, Christopher McCormick, who's now working as an international consultant, focusing on also the regional cooperation integration with the thematic group in SDCC ADB. So before we go to the panel discussion, let me now introduce Rolando to give the presentation on the progress of ARCII improvement. Rolando?
Thank you very much, Xinyoung, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today in this discussion. Over the past year, we have worked on different features of the ARCII index with the aim to make it more precise and relevant, as Xinyoung mentioned. And we will focus our presentation on 3 main messages or areas. First, we will provide an update on the baseline ARCII estimates, which is the 6-dimensional ARCII indicator that we have estimated since 2017. Second, we will present the progress on the enhanced framework, as it was mentioned. And third, we will share some preliminary results on the spatial analysis. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So let's start with the latest findings of the regional integration trends in developing Asia. The latest ARCII estimates indicate that regional integration in Asia has remained broadly steady over the period 2006 to 2018. In particular, the overall baseline index rose slightly in 2018 due mainly to the rebound in the money and finance dimension. The contribution of two indicators in this dimension explain this trend. One is the interest rates dispersion, and second, the cross-border equity liabilities. The contribution of deposit rates to the money and finance dimension increases over the 2017 to 2018 period from 9 to 18%. And the recovery in 2018 can be explained by an increase in the interest rates in Asian countries, along with the global interest rates, leading to less dispersion and therefore higher financial integration. There is also a noticeable dip followed by recovery between 2017 and 18 in equity liabilities for several regions, including Central Asia, Oceania, and South Asia. Next slide, please. Overall, regional integration in Asia increased for almost all regions except for East Asia, but sub-regional performance across dimensions remains wide-ranging. We see still big and large gaps between the performance of ARCII indicators in the different subregions. If we look, next slide please, at the subregional initiatives, we observe again some differences in performance across groups. ASEAN remains the most integrated initiative in the region. Ongoing projects that promote border economic zones support the subregion efforts to establish effective ARCII linkages, for example, between PRC and ASEAN, with the goal of improving integration in mobility of goods and services and people. And we see this reflected in the performance of the index for this subregion. The GMS subregion also showed high performance in ARCII, with connectivity expected to improve with initiatives such as the Hanoi Action Plan and the different transport sector strategy, the projects related to the transport sector strategy 2030. CRII continues to be the least integrated subregion intraregionally, as measured by this indicator, although there are a few notable developments, including surpassing the targets established in the CRII transport and trade facilitation strategy, increased import capacity, and higher energy trade flows, which should reflect an improvement in the indicators in coming years. Next slide, please. Globally, the European Union remains the global leader in regional integration with strong drivers of institutional, monetary, and social integration. Asia comes second to EU and coincides with the EU's dimension and scores in trade and investment and RBC's regional value chains. The main gaps between Asia and the EU are still on the monetary and financial dimension, even if there is some convergence in recent years, and infrastructure and connectivity. Next slide, please. Let me talk briefly now about the enhanced framework. So, as the channels of regional cooperation and integration expand, the enhanced ARCII framework, as it was mentioned by Xin-Young, aims to reflect these developments by including new relevant dimensions and new indicators to existing ones. Two new dimensions are now part of the enhanced ARCII framework. One is technology and digital connectivity, and the second one is environmental cooperation and regional public goods. And you may remember in the workshop that we discussed this proposal for the enhanced framework. Let's now look at some of these indicators. Next slide, please. So this is the composition of each of the new dimensions, where we try different sort of indicators, most of them bilateral, which go in line with the type of indicators that we have collected in the ARCII index. Let's look at some of the technology and digital connectivity. Next slide, please. We define, for example, two indicators of intra-regional research cooperation. One is the research outputs with intra-regional collaborators, in which we see a steady increase since 2006 in subregions, for example, in Central and East Asia, having the highest share of research outputs produced by intra-regional collaborators. Another indicator we use is the patent applications made with intra-regional residents relative to foreign residents. In 2018, as we see in the figure on the right, East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia had high shares of intra-regional patent applications relative to its total, whereas the Pacific lags behind others in the region. Next slide, please. So now let's look at two examples of indicators on internet penetration. One is the more classic internet penetration defined as the proportion of the population using the internet, where we see that overall global and inter and regional trends show a steady increase in most regions over the last decade. We see also a large divergence within Asia in terms of the performance in this indicator. And countries like Korea, Japan, and New Zealand have an average internet penetration above 85%, much higher than most of the Pacific countries in the region, which oscillate around 15%. Next slide, please. Now, we also developed a bilateral indicator of internet bandwidth capacity based on data that collects data on email, web page traffic, streaming, VPN traffic over a certain period. And here, interestingly, we see that Asia's bilateral internet bandwidth performs even better regionally than with the rest of the world. Asia's intra-regional internet bandwidth has improved considerably over the last decade, from around 2 to 56 gigabytes per second, and is much higher, as you can see from the table on the left, with its own region and countries within the region than with the rest of the world. And it gives a new angle also to the topic of digital connectivity and digital penetration. Next slide, please. Let's now take a quick look at some of the indicators on the environmental dimension. We have estimated, for example, indicators on the proportion on environmental goods trade, which basically captures a global trade in 54 items listed in APEX list of environmental goods, which include renewable and clean energy technology, wastewater treatment technology, and air pollution control technologies. And here we see that Asia and Europe are at the forefront in terms of intra-regional trade. And in Asia, it has increased approximately around 17 points in the last, between 2006 and 2018. Next slide, please. Another indicator that we have looked at is the number of ratified environmental agreements, which is not a bilateral indicator, but which gives us an idea of how governments are committed and are adhering to international standards in terms of environmental performance. And we provide different comparisons here, as you can see, for the region, at the subregion, and also for the subregional initiatives level. Next slide, please. Now, we are also improving a number of indicators on the existing dimensions. And the reason for this was also to respond to some of the issues that we encountered with original indicators that we had in the previous version of the index. In particular, we work on the monetary and financial integration dimension, in particular developing an indicator based on exchange rates stability, we call it. We are also working on an indicator that includes or incorporates value added as a measure of regional value chains. And we are also working on different indicators of infrastructure and connectivity, including international flights and also indicators of institutional arrangements. So we won't have the time to go through all these indicators, but just to give you an idea, please, next slide. The indicator of exchange rate is measured as the difference between the average of intra-regional and global pairwise correlations in monthly US dollar exchange rates. And this is an indicator that allows us to have a much higher coverage, especially in Central and West Asia, where we couldn't reflect very well some of the financial integration flows that were happening in that region. And this indicator, what it aims to capture is basically the movements at the regional level of exchange rates compared to the rest of the world. And what we see is that, not surprisingly, Europe and North America have or registered the higher level of intra-regional exchange rate stability. Next slide, please. Another example is the indicator of international flight passengers, which measures basically the number of passengers sold on regional flights as the share of total and international flights. And here again, what we see is that Europe and Asia, which have a high level, network of regional flights, they have reflect better connectivity and mobility within these regions. And interestingly, at the subregional level, we see that the Pacific and Southeast Asia perform much better, or better at least, than other subregions in Asia. Next slide, please. Finally, one indicator on terms of international or intergovernmental participation on intergovernmental organizations, which shows how Asia, even if it's one of the regions that is less prone to participate in intergovernment organizations, has registered some of the improvements, largest improvements in terms of participation between 2006 and 2018. This is again another new indicator that we are now estimating for the whole sample of 158 countries in the ARCII framework. Next slide, please. Let me finalize with a brief presentation of the main results of the spatial analysis that we are doing on using basically the indicator. Next slide, please. The dots here represent the ARCII scores of each country. The larger the dot, the higher the ARCII score. And here the hypothesis is that the economy's location could play a key role in its ability to forge linkages with other economies in the region. In other words, an economy's level of regional integration tends to depend on its neighbor level of regional integration. As shown in this map, economies with low ARCII scores tend to be clustered together, and the same happens for economies with high ARCII scores. So this is the type of hypothesis we are testing, and if we go, next slide, please. If we perform a formal statistical test, we confirm the presence of spatial dependence on regional integration in Asia Pacific. In particular, we use Moran's test to determine whether an economy's level of ARCII is associatively, positively or negatively with that of its neighbors. And we find indeed that there is this association, which is not surprising, and is, for those who have worked in this spatial economics, is one robust result that we have. Areas in dark red reflect economies that form a cluster of high ARCII values, whereas areas in dark blue are clusters with low ARCII values. So next slide, please. The impact of location in the regional integration process could be explored through a regression analysis, and this is what we do very briefly here, looking at how in a classic OLS, what we see is how the level of integration, if we control by GDP, land, population, etc., we see that the spatial model should be used instead of a standard OLS model. In other words, the initial results of this analysis warrant estimation of a spatial model instead of a non-spatial model for the integration and for the dimensions trade and investment in particular, movement of people, and institutional and social integration. Next slide, please. We consider two spatial models. One is the autoregressive model, and another one is the spatial error model. And basically, we test which is the choice of the spatial model that is guided, that will be fits better with the results that we are obtaining. And what we see is that the spatial regressions results point to neighboring effects on the level of regional integration and real income as significant determinants of overall regional integration. So again, this is just to open a possible way of using the ARCII index in a spatial analysis setting, and that could be extended much more to analyze, for example, the dimensions, or look at the subregional model, what are the determinants of RCI trends within a certain subregion. Next slide, please. So these are the three key messages. So I will not repeat them, but basically what we wanted is to present an overview of the baseline ARCII, what we call the baseline, which is the 6-dimensional, introduce the enhanced framework and some of the new indicators that we have collected, and finally present some of the spatial analysis. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps for this project, what we are doing at the moment is we are completing the data analysis. So for those who are familiar, the principal component analysis using the enhanced framework. We are also working on the preparation of thematic studies, including the spatial analysis and subregional analysis, in particular for the Eurasia region. And the idea is to prepare this material for the presentation of the enhanced framework and database next year, along with some subregional seminars and activities with think tanks and capacity building. We invite you to check the latest results of the ARCII. So you have the scan code here. And also we will, this week, we will finalize the publication of the workshop highlights for those who participated in the first meeting. Let me stop here and thank you again for the opportunity. Over to you, Simeon.
Thank you, Rolando. That was a very comprehensive but quite new presentation. Really enjoyed a lot. I'm going to now invite our panelists to share their initial feedback and any comments on the ARCII as presented by Rolando. So our first panelist is Dr. Hans Holzacker. Hans Holzacker is the chief economist at the CRII Institute, UNCI, in People's Republic of China. Before joining the CRII Institute, he was a lead economist for Central Asia at European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. He has over 30 years of experience as an economist focusing on transition economies. We also have Alfredo Perdiguero, as introduced briefly. He's director of the Regional Cooperation Operations Coordination Division in Southeast Asia Department of ADB. He has also worked mostly in Southeast Asia for over 20 years and has very deep knowledge and extensive work experience with ADB on regional cooperation integration issues. And the listed at the last is our dear friend Christopher McCormack. He's currently an international consultant working mainly in the area of regional cooperation integration strategy, policy formulation, and economics, corporate strategy and technology innovation policy. He used to be the staff of ADB and worked mostly focusing on. Oopsie. We hear some background noises. So if Yes, thank you. He was focusing on the development of ADB's corporate-wide long-term strategies, cooperation among major multilateral development banks on global development agenda and strategy, and general capital increases of banks' ordinary capital resources, and the replenishment of the bank's ADF. And now I'm going to invite each panelist to share 5 minutes initial feedback and any comments if you have on ARCII. Okay, Hans, can I start with you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to ADB and Rolando especially for inviting us here, and also to be ready to share this work with CRII and cooperate with the CRII Institute and cooperate with us. This is very valuable to us. By the way, can you see my slides? I will show you very shortly.
We can see.
Also, we updated also the current regional integration index, which is based on the ARCII. And I would like to share a few thoughts from our update, which would fit also in what ADB is right now doing to enhance the ARCII. So before going into detail, let me congratulate for this plan to enhance the ARCII and how it is done. I think it will be a big step to reform some of the remaining issues in compiling ARCII, and especially for us also is interesting the inclusion of the new dimensions, in part also because CRII integration is more, in some way, more about corporations and about internal market, and these new dimensions about cooperation rather than to establish an internal market in the region. And these new dimensions kind of reflect very well specifically the cooperation side of this integration and cooperation process. And I think this is a good step forward. I can't really comment in detail on the spatial model. However, I think in general it's a very good idea to use the ARCII to investigate more and more factors of the integration process in the region and globally. So congratulations also on this. Let me show you. Sorry. Can I share my screen? It does not work. Now it goes.
Yeah.
Let me come to what we did with the current regional integration index. We updated it, this data through 2019. And what you can see here is the orange line represents what we had in the previous report based on 2006 to 2016 data. And now we have this 2006 to 2019 data. And what you can see is compared that the results are not really very robust. So we have basically, especially if we exclude the People's Republic of China, lower integration than we had in the previous report. However, this is in part because of data issue. We have also changing in the weights of the individual indicators. So what you can see here in general, we have lower integration. However, within the new report, there is a slight increase in integration in the region. And one thing you can also see here, Afghanistan previously was rated pretty low in terms of integration. It moved up the scale some ranks. So what we have here, I'll show you a little bit. So the black line again is overall integration. So you can see a slight increase. This is only data of the new report. What you can see here also is that the highest integration is in the dimension of regional value chains, especially if we include the People's Republic of China on the left-hand side. The lowest integration is in money and finance. However, there are some problems with these indicators, especially in the CRII region also, because these regional value chains represent in part complementarity and concentration, and only in part actually regional value chains. And there is also, we have the issues that the high readings are basically because of commodity exports in the region, and so it represents mostly forward linkages and not so much backward linkages, so it actually overestimates a little bit where we are here with this integration. And on the money and finance, Rolando also mentions that the dimension could be improved. In the CRII region, we have especially the problems that we have a little bit of poor indicators. So there's actually not really cross-border activity measured, but these indicators here measure rather the state of the financial system in these countries. And I don't show you here, to be brief, the differences by country, but basically it would like show People's Republic is very high, the Kyrgyz Republic, for example, is low, but it actually does not really completely reflect the cross-border activity. So coming to the issues we have a little bit, and where ARCII, the reform of ARCII is going to help, is one, as I mentioned, is the robustness of results. However, I'm not sure exactly what we can do about it, because in part it depends on the quality of data we get from the countries. So we could make more frequent updates, but this is of course more hiding than actually a solution. Then, as I mentioned, some of the dimensions do not actually measure what they pretend to measure exactly. As I mentioned, the regional value change are a bit problematic. The finance, money and finance is a bit problematic, and also the institutional and social integration is measured probably too much in some agreements, business agreements, and too little on the actual social integration. And also, as I mentioned, what actually means correct integration and cooperation, and is it really measured by these new dimensions? And I think in all this, maybe not so much about the robustness of the results, but also here we can improve the indicators a bit. But definitely the introduction of the new dimensions, and probably also to the making of the dimensions more exactly measuring some specific issues will be of big help, and we are looking forward really to the reform of the ARCII. And once again, congratulations to this work. Thank you. All from my side.
Thank you, Hans. Can I invite Alfredo to give some feedback and comments? Alfredo? Yes.
Yes, can you see me? Yeah.
Yes. Do you have
Okay.
also PPT or?
No, I don't have any PowerPoint. No.
Okay.
I would like just to comment, and first of all, again, to congratulate to the team. I have been quite involved from the beginning on this process and attended several of meetings. And I have to say that every time this indicator comes better and better. So I would like really to congratulate. I really think that the inclusion of the two new areas, as discussed last time, is very relevant, really very important. Only one comment there on you refer to environment and environmental indicators, and sometimes you refer to regional public goods also. But later, I just see, looking at the indicators that you have identified, that they're all related to the environment, which I think is very appropriate. Yes, it's a note of caution because, you know, these days everybody talking about regional public goods referred, of course, also to health, which is an area that I imagine could be included in the future on how actually countries are integrated in the area of health. For example, how much actually people from one country use health services in the neighboring countries. That will be just to put you an example of something. But if you determine that it's really about environmental integration, that's fine, and I think it's appropriate, and you can leave the things like health for future reports. As always, I would like to, in our region, we regrettably, we don't do any composite indicator for the GMS, BMPIAGA, or IMTGT. The main reason being that actually we deal with provinces, and it's very difficult to get data. For example, in the GMS, there are only two provinces, Yunnan and Guangxi, and it's really difficult to get data. We already do some work, for example, on calculating intra-regional trade, intra-regional investment, intra-regional tourism, and that's already incredibly difficult to do when you want to do it with provinces. The same happened with BMPIAGA and IMTGT. But I think that the work that you're doing will be of incredible amount of interest for ASEAN. And as you know, ASEAN and the ASEAN Secretariat, they do a lot of work on statistics. And I think all this work that the team has been doing could be incredibly, adding incredible amount of value really to ASEAN. We will be very much happy to really bring you to ASEAN with ASEAN Secretariat and maybe make a presentation to them on to add value and to complement to what they are already doing. Data quality, data consistency and comparability, and having good databases and managing properly those databases with this enormous amount of data, and creating the institutional capability also in these institutions to manage those. I think that is something that we need to do maybe more work in the future. And this work that you're doing, for example, you mentioned it as your third element, doing capacity building to the countries on how to do this better. So I think those that capacity building should include all these elements on data collection. The quality of data, at least for what we notice in our region, is still quite low. And when you have data, it's very difficult to make it comparable. I mean, we just see this in things like intra-regional investment, for example, or intra-regional trade. The definitions are actually very different. I also saw you have new data, for example, trade in ICT products, trade in environmental products. These are quite new areas, which of course APEC and eventually WTO has been working quite a lot. I wonder if you already have well-established definitions of those two new indicators, because there was a lot of debate in APEC when they discussed about environmental goods and services, and there is a lot of discussions still in WTO on what ICT goods are. I also found very curious the conclusion that when a country is integrated, I mean, basically this more well integrated, their neighbors are also more integrated. It's an interesting and curious discussion, and I will be happy to hear more about it and it seems to me quite logical, but it doesn't seem to be always the case. You have countries such as Vietnam, for example, which has quite a low level of integration in ASEAN, and however, is much more integrated with the world economy. The same would happen with Singapore, for example, which is very well integrated with the world economy. And even in other regions in the world, countries which are in the middle of the most integrated area, such as Switzerland, and they maybe are not so integrated with Europe. But actually, I don't even have the data, so maybe I'm speculating. But I found it a very, very interesting conclusion, and I'm very sure that you will be right on that. Maybe last comment from me is on the why are we doing this and how can we use the results of this. As always, we say RCI is a means, is not an end. And I think it will be very interesting to, when you prepare the report, and I think you do so, to really keep extracting conclusions really about not only what the situation is, but what can we learn from that situation. For example, if really there is deeper integration in one of the elements of the composite indicator, and that what is the connection of more integration in a particular area with, for example, more growth or more inequality. So looking more on what is the connection of the different RCI elements of the composite index with the final outcomes for development that the regions and the countries really are intending to achieve. I know I'm asking a lot there, but I think it would be good to keep reflecting on those, because I see also, and it happens to us many times, when we just present results about this is what is happening in the region, and then the policymakers will come to us and say, well, this is nice, but and then what? What is the implication of this? But I'm asking you a lot when you are actually are doing already, I think, a lot by actually creating such a comprehensive indicator. So fantastic effort. I think very new additions to the indicators, and I'm very happy to really also introduce you and bring you in Southeast Asia, especially ASEAN, or see how can we utilize this indicator better in our particular region in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thanks, Alfredo. Some of the questions are being already addressed by ongoing research, and I hope that we can discuss those a bit more in the panel discussion. Well, I'm going to invite now Chris to give initial feedback and comments on the presentation. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on this work. I mean, I think ARCII is emblematic of ADB's thought leadership in RCI in the region. And you look at what's happening in the region, we're looking at Asia becoming the center of global economic growth, and in the process, Asia is joining more mega-regional trade agreements, and they're joining more inter-regional agreements. So I think it's good that the stakeholders in the region have an RCI index that's designed specifically for Asia and the Pacific. So I think the timing of this is very good. When I look at ARCII, I see it as supporting broadly three functions: performance assessment and accountability. What progress has been achieved on specific dimensions of RCI and where in the region? Two, it helps with planning and prioritizing new RCI programs and operations. Not in detail necessarily, but it gives a good overview of what progress is in the region, and it can help support policy dialogue. But I take the point that Alfredo made that data the previous two speakers made. Data is very, very important in this regard. That being said, I think ARCII can still be used as a good guide and supportive of policy dialogue on RCI going forward. And third, of course, I think ARCII is a knowledge product. It should be looked at as a knowledge product, and it helps understand better the drivers of RCI independently, but also the interdependencies, which I think is something Alfredo was bringing out, and how RCI can actually contribute to wider economic benefits and outcomes. So I'm going to focus my remarks here just very briefly on sort of the alignment between ARCII and the ADB's sort of results frameworks for RCI, ARCII as one of several RCI indexes, and possible enhancements to the spatial analysis. When I look at the alignment between ARCII and the RCI corporate results framework, I think it's actually fairly tight. ARCII is already at level 1 of the corporate results framework on RCI. So ARCII gives an assessment of what progress we see in RCI across the region. It's not limited to progress on projects which ADB has supported, but it's progress on RCI in the region. So from that regard, I think going wider and having more indicators, more dimensions and more indicators is appropriate. This is the largest region of the world. It's the fastest growing region of the world. Its trade and investment is expanding rapidly. So we need a RCI index, which is, in a sense, a bit more expansive than in the past. So I think that direction is correct. Also, I think the ARCII, as I will say in a few minutes, I think it supports well the results framework. I think it's closely associated with the results framework in many ways of the RCI operational plan, which was approved by ADB in 2019. Let me start my more detailed discussions with the two new dimensions, technology and digital connectivity, and the environment, cooperation, and regional public goods. Digital technology is going to be continues to be the driver of higher productivity and improved integrity of regional and interregional trade in terms of providing services across long-distance value chains, logistics, facilitating timely cross-border flows of goods, services, and people, and associated digital payments. Digital trade in goods and services is actually the fastest growing segment of regional interregional trade, and it's actually becoming the most inclusive form of trade. Digital allows SMEs unprecedented opportunities to access export markets in the region and elsewhere at almost any scale of operation. And with digital platforms, which if you're doing digital products and services and you're on a digital platform, if you're scaling up your output of products and services, the marginal cost of scaling up is almost zero. So I think the importance of being able to have an index which assesses the region's capability to generate and apply digital technology to trade and investment and to produce products and services that are digital based is very important and relevant to trade, to RCI going forward. Let me look at the new dimension on environmental cooperation and regional public goods. Here, I think this inclusion of this indicator is very interesting because 2 years ago, your department, your division's work on the Asian Economic Integration Report in 2018, you set out a very strong development and economic rationale for investment in regional public goods. The work of the RCI thematic group, and I think the operations departments, we drew upon that work and other knowledge work that was being done by others in the organization to really prioritize RPGs as a pillar of RCI operations, which was approved in the new strategy. So what we've seen is in the past couple of years, starting with your work in 2018 in the AEIR, we've now, in a sense, closed the loop from development research to strategic operational planning under OP7 to corporate and region-wide assessment in terms of ARCII in relation to collective action to preserve and protect the region's diverse environment and ecosystem. And I think that adds greatly to the relevance of ARCII. Before, it didn't cover regional public goods. Now it does, and I think that's a real achievement. I think that also, if you look at the indicators that you have under your new environment RPG group, I think they support the RCI operational plan in relation to the following: climate-friendly cross-border infrastructure, carbon markets and emission trading schemes, transboundary water and natural resources management, promoting the blue economy, and cross-border mechanisms to enhance cooperation among countries in the region on regional public goods. Having said that, I strongly echo Alfredo's point. I think going forward, you need to bring in some indicators on regional health. I think that would be important. When I look at the enhancements that you're making under the existing dimensions, these, I think, strongly support the RCI operational plan in relation to strengthening financial sector cooperation, investment in regional aviation infrastructure, expanding SME participation in regional value chains, and sustaining collective action on RCI generally. The proposal for improved customization of ARCII, I think, is going to be one of the interesting things going forward. And I don't think there's a simple answer to this, but broadly, I would suggest the following. You don't need to confine the core set of dimensions or indicators to the original 6. I think ERCI and the operations departments and maybe the region and maybe the RCI thematic group should look at basically the indicators that are covered under ARCII and look at the panorama of indicators that the RCI, the operational, sub-regional operational platforms use, like Alfredo was discussing, and come up with what might be a composite set of indicators which relate to ARCII, but also ones that are common to across the subregions. So initially get a set of, as I say, non-ARCII indicators that are common across subregions if you can, and then start to build on that for purposes of customization. Let me turn briefly to the links between ARCII and the other indexes. You're quite right, there are other indexes out there, World Bank's Composite Regional Cooperation Index, Africa Regional Integration Index, and the HINRIC Sustainable Trade Index. If you look at them, they have similarities and differences, including with ARCII. Most of them seem to be employing composite indicators, not all of them, but many of them do. But where the similarities sort of fade and where the differences emerge is variability, I think, on the choice and definition of indicators under each dimension. So you need to understand the differences on those indicators well in order to start making comparisons across the indexes. Some indexes, I think, distinguish between indicators that are sort of ultimate indicators, such as actual flows of goods and people across borders, and intermediate outcomes, such as signed free trade agreements. Now, the HINRIC Sustainable Index is quite interesting, as you know, because it basically is an index designed to address a specific principle, that trade cannot be sustainably pursued without responsible environmental stewardship and a commitment to fully developing social capital. That's a very interesting approach. They have two other indicators on economics and social, but I think the balance you have in ARCII is a very good balance and useful for this region. So, I mean, you and your colleagues are experts on knowing what these various indexes are and how effective they may be or relevant to the region. I just confine my suggestion here to the following. In the context of Asia Pacific, let's continue to use ARCII as the core foundational index, but keep in view the periodic results generated by other indexes, particularly results that relate to Asia, but also to other regions for the sake of comparability. I also think it's important to point out here the other work that you've done on ADB's Global Integration Index. Now, this is an index, in my view, that parallels the ARCII, but it's been developed in a way that allows for measuring integration with countries outside of the region. I think this is highly relevant because Asian countries are increasingly participating in the mega regional trade agreements, but also the interregional agreements. But it would be helpful going forward with your work on ARCII if ERCI could provide some further guidance on how ARCII and the Global Integration Index complement each other and how their respective findings should be viewed and used and maybe they should not be used together. So I think some further advice and guidance would be helpful. Let me end my remarks initially here by looking at possible enhancements to spatial analysis. I think the insights from the statistical based spatial analysis of ARCII scores are meaningful and helpful. They deepen our understanding of which statistical tools should be applied for assessing performance for specific dimensions of RCI. They help us better understand the crucial determinants of regional integration, and the latest results clearly point to the need to consider expanding ADB support for inter-subregional RCI, possibly as a way of accelerating and achieving improved income and social equality across the regions over time. Having said that, I think I would encourage ARCII to draw upon the results of other RCI spatial analyses, which is based on GIS technologies, generating RCI-related location data and attribute data. For example, observable, measurable changes in cross-border land utilization or the agglomeration of connectivity infrastructure supporting cross-border trade and financial flows. I believe actually some of the regional departments, particularly I think SCRD, are employing GIS technologies for the purposes of planning, prioritizing RCI operations, and I think IED has started to use it in terms of evaluating RCI operations. So I think I would encourage ERCI to explore how GIS-generated data can be used by ARCII or be a useful complement to ARCII scores. So briefly, in conclusion, I think the enhancements to ARCII that are being suggested are relevant to the emerging RCI regional and global development context and for generating a broader base of usable knowledge for all RCI practitioners in ADB and RCI stakeholders across the region. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chris. Very interesting observations and useful insights. Well, let me have some the panelists to have like answers to questions. Now, in fact, you know, I think like we did try to get the people who have some sub-regional insights, given that we notice significant variations across the different sub-regions in terms of you know, the measurement of regional cooperation, in a sense that you know, the ARCII framework really is also confined by the data availability. There's also the country and sub-regional context where the measurement issues, but also like applicability issues of this type of composite index. So I would like to ask Hans from CRII Institute if I was also involved in developing this CRII Regional Cooperation Index, and I did note quite a bit of challenges in data, and in terms of CRII, in fact, this issues of like money and finance integration, there were not many like bilateral measures that we can use to construct the data. There were a lack of like even the stock market indices, and then in the bond market wasn't that there, and there was looking at like financial flows quite like bilaterally. It's very difficult to get the bilateral financial flows for the CRII Institute. So given these challenges for measuring integration in CRII, like what sort of like the initiatives, efforts that the CRII Institute have undertaken to create the CRII Regional Integration Index? I always feel the bigger challenge of this composite index is not necessarily creating index. Anybody like with some time and effort can create the index. The real question is, can maybe the index goes up or down, or like, yes, of course, there are some structural like weaknesses in this the regional cooperation. And how do we put this then movement of index in the regional context, like in terms of the CRII like a region, like what could be the this context for interpreting the regional integration? What do you think is the drivers for the regional cooperation? Is the this initial framework of 6 different dimensions, does it really tell you something about the progress of RCI in CRII? Can I get some feedback from Hans?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So yes, first there are of course some measurement issues and data availability issues. However, if we are going forward with the ARCII reform and possibly in parallel also by the current regional integration index, I think there is some room for improvement indicators, and Actually, Rolando mentioned already one of them, which is the co-movement of exchange rates, for example, which is readily available and an important issue, but also within the finance indicators, we could have a bit more of cross-border investment. This is one set of issues. Another set of issues is some of the indicators don't capture really fully what CRII integration would mean. For example, on investment, the investment indicators. So what we have is mutual investment. But actually, mutual investment probably is less important for the integration of the region than third-party investment into the region, which is valuable or important for the region as a whole. For example, we have General Electric invested in Kazakhstan producing locomotives, but this is not only important for Kazakhstan. This could be important for the region as a whole. And we have new forms of investment, like non-equity modes of international governance right now, which could be important for the region as a whole. So in some way, we need to capture not only mutual things, but also third-party things, which are important for the integration of the region as a whole. On top, we have in the region several integration projects going on, which capture parts of the region and other parts of the region. For example, the Eurasian Economic Union, which is where Russia, of course, is an important player. We have the BRI, where China is an important player. We have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other projects, ECO. So in some way, it would be good to capture this. It was already mentioned today that we might have integration in the region, but we have also integration of the region with the world, and this is also important, I think, to capture. So to make my answer a bit more short, yes, I think we have to think in some way how to modify indicators to further improve. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Hans. Well, Alfredo, you mentioned a couple of things that, very insightful in a way. Already, some of the studies that we are doing are like in the direction to answer the questions or like comments that you raised. In fact, as you mentioned, there's also the countries that are more open, rather globally, like Vietnam might be, or especially like Singapore, might be more open globally, but then regional integration might be a little less. In fact, one of the study that we did was also constructing the globalization index that can be decomposed into intra-regional development and inter-regional development for globalization. And so using the bilateral data, like anything that the country, the country's interaction with countries within the same region can be captured for the intra-regional integration, and the countries' interaction with the countries that are outside that specific region are captured in the extra-regional integration. But both will be composite into a globalization index. That's how we created this globalization index. And what we I think what we capture is something rather intuitive, of course. It was like if you think about it, the regional integration is actually a regional bias. The countries that are not necessarily very open can be still highly regionally integrated because they are not open, and then they are rather restricting their economic activities with a like small number of neighboring countries. If you look at like in North Korea, it's going to be one of the probably highest regional integration, and have a probably lowest globalization. So as you have rightly pointed out, in fact, Singapore comes up one of the very high globalized economy, but Singapore at the same time is a very highly regionally integrated economy. Better example might be actually Singapore versus Hong Kong. Hong Kong is rather globalized, around about even the same level as Singapore. Singapore is as global as Hong Kong, but in fact, Hong Kong is less regionalized than compared to Singapore. So there are these, different regional dynamics depending on which region you are in. Sometimes your integration with the neighboring economies might not be as high as your interactions with the countries outside the region. And what's more important is that then what now then? Yeah, is the regional integration actually helpful versus global integration? If globalization is doing as good as regional integration, perhaps you don't really have to pursue regionalization. So what is the additional, or what is the a different benefits of the regional integration that the country can expect? And the study does show that countries that are smaller, a bit like a lower middle income, tend to benefit more from the regional integration. So when there is a a more regional, intra-regional integration versus extra-regional integration, intra-regional integration tend to benefit the income level that are not the high level, but low middle to the middle income economies, and some of those are really, I think, more intuitive in a way, but eventually it kind of shows that why we do try to measure these regional integration, and why comparing the regional integration across the different dimensions, because not all regional integration index, not all dimensions that are included in the regional integration index will have the same sort of a growth impact or inclusiveness impact or even the sustainability impact. So in some sense, the measuring these in also in a more the granular, a more micro level measurement of this integration, and then the different dimensions of this integration will be eventually useful to understand which sort of sectors, which which sort of thematically focus the the support in the regional integration will be really helpful in achieving some of the eventual goals, some of the SDG goal or anything else. So I actually looked at the the efforts that the GMS have been also making in terms of measuring, and there are various dimensions that you look at also in terms of the intra-regional trade and the cost to export, cost to import, also the in terms of connectivity or in terms of infrastructure and energy. from the GMS or like a Southeast Asia, what do you feel as the important like a dimension or important driver for the regional integration, and why do you feel that some are important? Like from what objective? Like, do you actually have an objective to use this regional integration as a leverage or platform to achieve in the project?
Thank you very much for your good questions. I mean, there are many issues somehow to discuss. I think from the conceptual point of view, I would like to support, just to start, some of the issues that have been mentioned before, even by Hans and also by Chris, because one of them is really what you are describing just now, Sinyon, which is this index that you have created, the team has created, while it's good, the value probably is into going into the granularity of it and trying to see what is each of the elements of it, and we don't know which one is more important, but that's what will be a very interesting analysis. Which one is more important of those? Not all are equally important for achieving development objectives, either if it's economic growth, for example, if that is one of the objectives of the sub-region or a country, or if it's more equality in a country, or other development goals that you may have. But that's possible to do. You can go into, it's very useful to have this document, this indicator, and be able to go deeper into it and correlate those a long time with how a country is developing or achieving its development goals. I also wanted to emphasize what Chris mentioned sometimes about indicators which are somehow like outcome indicators or output indicators. And I think there is a little bit of mixing of all. Maybe that's a natural thing to do in such a complex indicator like this, composite indicator. But some of them refer to what is really integration. And they are measuring what really, if a country is more integrated or not integrated with others. While others, they are measuring cooperation, which is a different thing. So for example, your new indicator about how a country, how many international organizations are you belong in one country, that's you can say that this is an indicator measuring cooperation and not necessarily integration. No? The same is how many FTIs a country participate. That also is a cooperation and not an integration indicator. So I would have distinguished between the two. And then the other very important element was the one you mentioned and also mentioned by Hans, which is that we are measuring two completely different things. One is if we integrate as a sub-region or as a region, and the other is if our country integrates more with the world. So basically, if it's it's openness we determine. No, that's very easy to see in trade. Is it the intra-regional trade indicators we calculate in the GMS, or is it openness to trade? No, how much over GDP you have total imports plus exports over GDP, and the two things measure two completely different things. So in the GMS and in ASEAN, we are quite clear on that. We are not taking RCI, I mean the integration, for example, intra-regional trade, increasing that as a panacea or as something that we have to continuously keep increasing. In ASEAN, for example, this has been 25% intra-regional trade for a very long period of time. And what we said is probably we have to increase this a little bit more, but we should not really become a closed region. We need to really keep integrating with the rest of the world. And that's what ASEAN has been doing both simultaneously. And that's why the 25% total intra-regional trade over total trade remains constant. But however, total trade has been increasing actually with the rest of the world. So this is a best situation. You keep integrating inside, but you keep integrating also with the rest of the world. Well, we believe those two objectives are important. But you can bring it to an extreme when, like in the European Union, they reach 72% intra-regional trade. I think they realize that there are important risks in doing so. And too much integration could be a little bit risky, as we can see when crises happen and your neighbors are affected by the crisis because their economies are very much already interconnected with yours. And at the same time, you have no way out then because you are not diversified enough. So Germany now is trying to diversify really their exports beyond the European Union. So there are risks in this strategy of development, but ours is clear. Keep integrating a little bit more. For example, in GMS, it's about 10%, 9 to 10% intra-regional trade. We need to keep integrating in investment a little bit more, but do not close yourself and become a new fortress. We don't want GMS fortress or ASEAN fortress as they had Europe fortress. So we have to be careful in that regard also.
Okay, thank you. Well, Chris, you did mention something about also, there are need to customize and then differentiate this measurement for each subregion. And I think from what Alfredo mentioned and then what Hans also earlier said, of course, there are some subregional like a unique environment, and then also there's some like a regional characteristics where certain sort of a dimension or certain sort of pillars of a regional integration might be much more relevant or maybe progressing faster or slower. So there are different like a speed or magnitude of development in across different dimensions of regional cooperation. But there are also some trade-off, right? Like when we look at these compass indicators, as you earlier mentioned, that why do we need these things? Because we want to have some objective, competitive, that can provide some comparison across different regions, different also dimensions of the regional integration. And if we customize like different indicators for different subregions, or like because of the lack of data, because of maybe the subregional characteristic, we are going to also risk losing the possibility of putting those indicators on the same like it's same bar, right? Like we're not really using the same indicators, and then what's coming out of that composite index may not be comparable across different subregions or even over time, because we might actually change some of those indicators. So how do we balance those needs that allow us to keep having this sort of benchmark or something that is more standardized, but versus there's a need to accommodate the differences in the regional characteristics or differences in demand or need by these subregions.
Okay, thank you, Sin Young. I mean, I don't think there's any simple algorithm that's going to give you the answer to that question, but I would look at it to some extent this way. When you have a set of countries, countries which are perhaps grouped in one area, and basically they are not well integrated. They have a low diversification of the economy, and they basically, in a sense, trade in the same kind of goods, maybe primary commodities. They're not going to trade with each other. That's not their future. They have to diversify the economy in some ways. They can't continue to trade on that narrow sort of set of products. So they have two challenges. One is to say, okay, what I want to do is find more longer distance markets outside of the region where I can sell more of what I already produce, or perhaps I can look across the region and begin to think about, well, all right, I've seen other countries have an experience in diversifying their economies. Did they diversify through regional? How important was regional trade, you know, to really move the diversification of the economy forward in the beginning? My intuition tells me it was probably fairly significant in many cases, and to start building up comparative advantages with the countries in different subregions. So I do think it's important to keep a core element of RCI indicators across the various subregions. And one of them I would say would be on the financial side. We know basically, and I think you know this better than anybody else, and maybe many others in the bank, we know that financial sector integration across the region basically lags behind trade integration. So, you know, is that something that should be maintained that as a core area of RCI across the region, because there's so much potential for improving, shall we say, integration of the financial sector. Again, my intuition tells me that probably yes, that's true. Another area is probably going to be looking at the whole issue of ICT standards, but also industrial standards. If you talk to many people in the private sector, and I've talked to a fair number of them, they will say to me, we don't have a big problem in terms of, you know, getting into value chains and knowing how to, in a sense, produce and things like that, and looking for countries to trade. Our biggest barrier is that we don't see commonality on product standards. We don't see commonality on border standards. So, you know, these drive cost. These imply costs for us. We can't produce at scale across a whole bunch of different standards in different countries. So I think, you know, can we look at expanding certain indicators for integration and using these on a regional basis across more countries as a way of creating larger regional markets, because this would lower the costs of doing business for many small and medium scale enterprises who probably for the foreseeable future, the next maybe 5, 10 years or 15, regional markets are going to be very, very important for them. Okay. Now, there may be other situations where some countries, in a sense, have a certain comparative advantage in certain products where they basically want to go global. And that could be either the primary commodities or they're working up the value chain. So my feeling is you really need to go into the individual economies or neighboring economies, and you have to get some perspective on the structure, the conduct, and the performance of the economies to start figuring out which indicators would, you know, be more relevant to the countries in terms of different time perspectives. What do they want to achieve in terms of diversification of their economy in 5 or 7 or 8 years? What particular markets do they really want to develop and expand? Take agriculture, for instance. The agricultural sector generally lags behind in most countries, it lags behind manufacturing and industry, and it's generally not that well integrated. I think there's lots of potential scope for integrating agriculture as a way of improving incomes in a sector of the economy which still employs a great number of people. But again, as I say, maybe more in-depth analysis of looking at the structure, conduct, and performance of economies and what their objectives are going forward over the next 5, 10, or 15 years, and then begin to customize your RCI indicators.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we don't have much time left, but I would like to open the floor to the participants. If anyone has burning questions, you can click on the raise hand button or just type your questions on the note section chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to give like a 1 minute final comments from all the panelists and the presenter also. So let me go back to Rolando. Maybe if you could just think of one key areas for preparing for post-COVID. We all say we are going to see a different shape of globalization. We are going to see a different shape of regional cooperation. To prepare the post-COVID regional integration, if there's any one missing kind of element in the current ARCII, what would that be? Rolando? Anything that you would like to? Yeah.
Sure. I think this is a question for all the panelists, or
yes.
for me.
Yes.
Okay.
For all the panelists, sure. And then you can actually have a final 1-minute comment.
Sure. No, thanks a lot, Sinyoung, and thank you so much for all the really insightful comments. Before answering the question, I would just like to emphasize, some key takeaways from the discussion. I think one of the takeaways that I take is that we need to improve the indicators where it matters, and that's something that mentioned by Hans in some of the areas where we can improve, and it's definitely something where we would really like to work together with you, Hans, and also with the work we are doing on the ARCII index to see if the indicators reflect what we want. Alfredo, thank you so much for all the comments. They are really, really useful. The point that you mentioned on the RPGs is true. At the moment, we have only the environmental indicators, but we definitely will develop further. And we want to find a good RPG indicator where we can focus. We cannot do 10, so we will probably need to identify one that is relevant. It could be the one on regional health, as you mentioned, but it's certainly an area where we still can develop further. On the points of the spatial analysis, I think Sinyoung, well, she's the author of this work, and also she explained also the linkages between the intra-regional, the extra-regional. It seems to me that we definitely need to think further on how to present the enhanced ARCII framework connecting to the discussion on the extra-regional linkages so that we respond to the question. It's not a matter of indicators. We have the indicators. We use the same data set to estimate the indicators. It's more a matter of how to present this in a way that is coherent and that makes sense, and that we can also address some of the questions of what is the ideal level of integration, as it was mentioned by Alfredo in the case of ASEAN. And finally, Chris, thank you so much for all the insights on the the connection to the conceptual framework, the other indexes that are relevant for ARCII and that we should also keep taking a look at. The link also on the inter-subregional RCI, which is something that we can explore and we will like to explore further also in the report using the new enhanced ARCII on the inter-subregional RCI, and also the ideas for the expansions to the spatial analysis. And to respond to the question by Sinyoung, I think one area on RPGs where we wanted to do something was on this institutional level. Maybe we need to separate between integration and cooperation, as it was mentioned. But I let maybe the colleagues and the panelists to respond to this question. Thank you, Sinyoung.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. So we go reverse order. Chris, can I have your 1 minute summarizing and also maybe suggesting one like a key areas for post-COVID ARCII?
Okay, thank you. I think in terms of sort of the 1 minute summary, I think the points about data quality is still going to be, I think, a constraint and a determinant about the efficacy of ARCII, but that's true for other indicators as well. So you have to keep an eye on to improve data quality in the region, whether you do it, whether it's been done by the operations departments, the RCI thematic group. So data quality will be, I think, a big issue. I think also this focus on the right balance in different subregions on whether or not it's the objective, the goal is greater regional cooperation or greater cooperation with the rest of the world through sort of open regionalism. And my last point, though, would be in terms of post in the COVID-19, I would really argue for an effort that would look at trying to use more extensively and or to as a complement or directly digitally geographic information systems data, because you're now in a situation where the digital technology and development unit in SDCC is running a webinar series with the International Cooperation and Development Fund, for instance, on looking at Earth observed observations and geographic information systems applications for disaster risk management and also for the agriculture sector. So I think there's a growing movement to look at using this kind of GIS data, not just for the purposes of looking ex post and saying, you know, what's happened, but they're also trying to combine this with artificial intelligence and machine learning to use and to develop sort of predictive models. So longer term, maybe this is a bit too longer term, but longer term, you may start thinking about, you know, can ARCII or elements of ARCII in certain areas where it's well developed, can it become a bit of a predictive tool going forward? I think the post recovery, post-pandemic recovery will be looking for that, because people need a lot of good evidence as to what decisions do they need to make.
Thank you. Okay, Alfredo?
Yes, very briefly also, and summarizing a few points that have been already mentioned, I would say for post-COVID-19, look at health indicators. I think you're going to be under certain pressure on that. That's an obvious one. And it's an interesting area, I think, to explore for future reports. The other is be able to answer that question, not only if countries are cooperating more, but if they're integrating more. And the two may have different answers, and it will be a very interesting thing to see. If you see a region that is really cooperating more, are they really integrating more or not? And then the other balance, again, when we discuss on the what is being better for a region, integrated really more, and what is the limit of that level of integration? If that could be, again, I compare the 71% intra-regional trade. Is it good to be so integrated really in a region? It depends on the size of the region. I know, of course, it's different if you look at the whole of Asia or if you look at the GMS only. But what is that appropriate level, an appropriate balance between, between opening up to the rest of the world and integrating? And then the last, and there are many, you only told me one, will be that part of the, look, you have a lot of very good data and very granular there. It is there. So it will be very interesting to see which one of those has been more important to contribute to development objectives. Which one of those? Because you have a lot of the data, but you could do very interesting analysis with those data to compare. Thank you.
Okay, Hans, you have a final word.
Thank you. So on the post-COVID world, two things. First, digitalization, and I think it's already in the plan, and this is very encouraging. And second, maybe health, yes.
Okay.
On the takeaways, one major takeaway, I think, is that I think almost all speakers supported that we need to look at what actually integration, cooperation means and how to use the ARCII for policy recommendations within this framework. So one of the main takeaways, and certainly I want to say that I'm very encouraged by our discussion and the enhancement of the framework and all the efforts, and I'm looking forward with great interest what will come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hans. And then thank you all participants. Well, we haven't really had any hands raised or final questions. So I guess our participants and our panelists, in fact, have given great answers to all the questions. So more questions from the floor. Thank you very much for participating and then joining us in the webinar. And we look forward to getting your feedback, also further collaboration on this progress of ARCII. I also like to thank our team to organize a great seminar today. Thank you. This is our next webinar. The RCI part, 16th RCI part. It will discuss the COVID impact on gender equality. So please do join us for the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you all.